all your contributions. It really helps us to apply for grants. You should be getting thank you notes from all of us, but we really appreciate your donations. You can see what we're all about here, protecting the environment, water, forests, rivers. Tonight we have Deena Sveinsson. I don't know if you noticed, but she has brought a couple of her giant rabbits with us tonight. So have fun. That'll be an interesting showpiece for everybody. And again, thanks for coming. Your contributions are so valuable, and we so appreciate your support through the year. So we've got a good lineup for 2025. Are we going to show that slide next or later?
At the end.
Later, okay. We'll show you what's happening next month. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Deena Sveinsson, who will talk about Lagomorphs.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Deena Sveinsson, and I am an award-winning photographer, and I live here in Estes Park. My main photography is with Lagomorphs, which are rabbits and hares and moose. And tonight, like I said, we're going to talk about some Lagomorphs. Since I was a little kid, I loved rabbits. I had pet rabbits, probably about 4 or 5 of them. And so when my husband and I moved here to Colorado, I wanted to do some volunteer work with some animals, and I really didn't know what to do. So I did some research, and I found an organization that was down in Broomfield. At the time, they were called the Colorado House Rabbit Society. So I decided, well, this seems kind of cool. Bunch of people who love rabbits. I love rabbits. Let's check this out. So come to find out, went down there, that they rehome rabbits, they take in rabbits, and they pair rabbits. So I did a couple weeks of volunteering, and I ended up being adopted by our first 2 rabbits, Breck and Copper, and well, the rest is history. And you can see 15 years later, we have 2 continental giant bunnies, Jackson and Cooper. So fast forward to my career. I am actually a medically retired commercial airline pilot. I used to work for one of the largest airlines in the world. And I had a misfortune that I could no longer fly airplanes. And that pretty much depressed me, left me on the couch for a better portion of the year. And I had read about the snowshoe hare. And since we live here near Rocky Mountain National Park, and I read about some information that there were snowshoe hares somewhere in the park, and I just needed to find them. So I started meeting some other photographers. I met another local photographer. We started going out day after day, month after month. And well, most of the times we came up empty-handed. But then one day, I met Yvette. And Yvette was a snowshoe hare who let me into her life. She let me sit, freeze my little butt off, while I waited for her to wake up so I can take some photographs of her. But it was then I decided that I wanted to learn more about the secret lives of Lagomorphs. So, we're going to start a presentation. So before we do that, just kind of from the audience here, what type of animals do you think about when you think about Estes Park, Rocky Mountain National Park, or Colorado? From the audience?
Animals. Elk.
Elk? Moose? Deer? Ground squirrels, bobcats. You ever think of rabbits?
No.
Ever think of hares? Okay, so we got some here thinking of hares, but not too many. For quite a few people in Colorado and in the photography world, most people don't think about rabbits and hares. They just think of rabbits and hares as something that's a meal for another animal that they want to photograph. For me, it's digging into the secret lives of Lagomorphs. So what is a Lagomorph? Lagomorph is a mammal that belongs to the order Lagomorpha. And there are 2 types of Lagomorphs. The first one is Leporidae, which are rabbits and hares. And the second one is Otrotonidae, which are the picas, and we're going to talk about both of these. So the lagomorph, the word comes from the Greek word lagos, which means hare, and morphe, which means boar. These will come to make sense a little further in the presentation. So, what's the difference between a rabbit and a hare? Again, from the audience? Can you tell which one is which? One is a rabbit and one is a hare. Which one is the hare? This one? This one? Okay. Mind you, these slides are coming in just a little bit dark compared to what they should be coming into, so just kind of keep note of that. The first one is a rabbit. This is a desert cottontail, and this is a snowshoe hare, which is the smallest hare, but this snowshoe hare is in its summer coat. So note, they look quite the same, but there's some differences. We can see the ears. These ears are pointed forward, those are sideways, but the coloring is different. So on a rabbit, we tend to have reddish gray. On hares, in the summer coat, we tend to have a reddish brown. And when you see them, if you can see them side by side, you would see the hare, the snowshoe hare, is a vibrant reddish brown instead of a dull. The eyes, if you can look at if you can see here, the eyes, the orange in the eyes, the hare is going to have much more than the rabbit. And if you look very closely, the facial features are just a little bit different. The hare has a longer snout, so to speak, versus the cottontail is a little shorter and a little stoutier. Okay, some differences between the rabbits and hares. Rabbits are typically smaller in size. They're about between 1 and 5 pounds. A hare is typically larger in size and it can be up to 10 pounds. On average, aside from the snowshoe hare, which is about 3 to 4 pounds, the larger hares tend to be about 8.5 pounds, with the females, in both cases of the rabbits and hare, being slightly larger. Rabbits will tend to have shorter and smaller hind legs, versus hares will have taller and larger hind legs. And the exception there again is the snowshoe hare. Rabbits tend to scuttle and jump. As you can see it kind of in that photo, it's just a short little jump, whereas hares will have long strides and jumps that let their feet, and their speed is much faster, and they can go up to about 35 miles an hour. Rabbits will tend to have smaller and shorter ears, versus the hares will tend to have larger and taller ears. And again, the exception here is the snowshoe hare. Rabbits are also born hairless and eyes are closed, with the hares being born with fur and their eyes are open. Typically, rabbits live in colonies, and this is typically, we'll also see them solitary, and hares will typically be solitary, but we can also see them in colonies. The gestation period of a rabbit is 30 days, versus the gestation of a hare is 42 days. Now also, typically, the weaning on a rabbit is 3 to 4 weeks, versus 6 to 7 weeks on a hare, and sexual maturity occurs at about 2 to 3 months on a rabbit, versus anywhere from 7 to 12 months on a hare. We also call, in the rabbit world, the babies, the youngs, they're called kits or kittens, versus leverets with a hare. And another difference is typically rabbits will live in warrens or burrows. So warrens are basically underground cities that you tend to find rabbits in. And so when they live in colonies, there's usually hundreds of them within a very large territory, versus hares, they live in what you call forms. And forms are basically impressions that they form in the ground or in snow. They will never burrow or go underground. So, how are rabbits and hares similar? So, they're crepuscular. Crepuscular means that they're mostly active during the morning hours or the evening hours, but they can also be active during the day and night. Rabbits rabbits are not wide awake all night long. They do sleep at night, and they're not sleeping all day long, and they do go up and move around and they eat, but typically they are active during the morning and evening hours. They both have ears, 2 of them, and the ears are used for hearing, but they're also used for temperature regulation. So somewhat like a car radiator, and we'll see some more on these in some slides, they have veins in their ears, and when the air hits it, it cools, it allows some cooling effects to happen within their body. Their eyes are positioned on the sides of their heads, so we call them side eye, and they have almost a 360-degree view, but they also have a blind spot that's directly in front of them. So you never want to stand directly in front of a hare fairly close because they won't be able to see you. They have an excellent sense of smell. They can smell you coming from a mile away. They can also smell any predator that's coming. They have fur on their feet. They don't have pads like a dog or a cat. Their padding is actually fur on the bottom of their feet. The males are both called bucks. The females are called does. And as we know what the term is, they're big breeders. Both rabbits and hares, they have about 3 to 4 litters a year, or they can have 3 to 4 litters a year. And typically breeding will start maybe end of February through July, depending on the breed. They're herbivores, so they're vegetarians. But there was, a couple years ago, there was a study that found out that snowshoe hare actually eat meat. And there was a snowshoe hare that actually ate another dead snowshoe hare. And they figured that was because that was the only thing they can eat. So they do eat meat, but only if they have to. They also, if they have young that have died, they will also tend to do that as well. And that's to keep predation and predators away. If they have a dead animal around in the warren or in their form, that attracts predators, so they want to keep that away, so they'll ingest the dead. They also eat cecotropes. Now, what cecotropes are, we call them in the rabbit world, we call them seagulls. Now, that is basically, they look like little bunches of grapes, and rabbits and hares, when they ingest their food, it goes through their digestive system, and it comes out, and they re-ingest it, and in those cecotropes are nutrients. They need to eat those nutrients because that gives them extra vitamins and minerals in their body. If they don't eat it, they can actually get thin, and over time, it can be degenerative, and they can actually die if they don't eat those. And they both molt. Now, molting is just a fancy word for shedding. They'll shed twice a year. Some will shed, and we'll get into this also, some will shed to a different color code, and typically they will do this in about October, and then again in April or May. And this would go from a summer to winter and a winter to summer coat. And when they do molt, their hair just doesn't fall out. They actually have 2 sets of hair that's growing, and one that's underneath, and the other one that just will come out in clumps. All right, so now let's actually talk about what we tend to see here in the Estes Valley. Mountain cottontails. So they're found about 6,000 feet up to the tree line, and they're found in moist, cool upland slopes dominated by coniferous trees. So when you go out and you're trying to plant those, to see those flowers grow that you planted 6 months, and you see a bunny eating them, and you get irritated because it took 6 months to get a little petal, that's a mountain cottontail. We see them in the park. This is a mountain cottontail that's here in the winter, and they're eating twigs because that's pretty much what they can dig up in some deep snow. But you can see their ears. You can see there's a lot of fur in their ears because they're adapted to the mountainous area. They're adapted to the cold. These typically look like your regular, like our rabbits. They tend to look like house rabbits also. But here, you can see this is one eating some grass in the summer. You can see how kind of their ears are rounded. And the veins that we talked about early for cooling, you can see some up on the right ear there's some veins that go through the ear, and it's summertime, and it's a little warm out, so this bunny is staying cool through the temperature regulation with the ears. That's another one that I found in the park, and you can see the hair in the ears, keeping them nice and cool. This is a young cottontail. He's a little older kid, so this is towards the end of the summer. And to cool off, they lay in the dirt in our little rocky soil that we have here, lack of soil I should say. And he's taking a little nap here and getting cool in the rocks. This is a kit, little one, little mountain cottontail. Figure he's already weaned, so he's probably about 2 or 3 months. And he's scratching his side of his face because he itches for some reason. And there he is in our backyard, having a feast with all the grass that's in there. This is a mountain cottontail, and what he's doing is he's reaching for his secals. So we talked about the secals, that they need to re-ingest those little grapes. This is how they look when they do that. So they're not rolling around in a ball, they're not doing bunny yoga. They're actually reaching inside between their legs as they can feel it's different from their normal pellets. We call them poop, right? It feels a little different to them. So they know when they come, and this position here is very vulnerable for a hare or a rabbit to do when someone's standing or when just out in the open. So this bunny that I'm photographing here actually feels very comfortable with me doing it. This puts him in a position that is very uncomfortable for them because they know predators can come. So when you see this, if you ever see this, that means they're actually comfortable with your presence. Here's another mountain cottontail, and what they'll do while they're pulling up the little grasses, and what they do, they don't mow, they actually pull the grasses up and they pull the roots out. So if you have them in your garden and they're doing something, they're not mowing, they're actually going to pull it up. You're going to need to replant everything. They pull it up and they'll start digging the roots because they love the tenderness of the roots. And here, this mountain cottontail here, he's also licking the rocks because minerals we get off the road, the same type of salt, they're trying to get the minerals out of the rocks. And you'll see this quite often during the summer. The next one we'll talk about is one of my favorites, is the snowshoe hare. So again, they're found in boreal forests and subalpine areas, and this is the smallest hare. And here in this photograph, this is another example of a hare reaching for its sequel. So you can see how he's tucked under, kind of looking like a little ball. But also on his fur, this hare is actually still molting a little bit. So you can see how there's he looks a little disheveled a little bit. He's actually in his summer coat, but he still has a little bit of his winter coat, which is the white coat that's still on his body. And that will, over time, that will fall off as he starts hopping through the woods against branches, that will eventually come off. And again, that's about a 60-day process of the molt from start to finish. So they'll come up in little patches, and we'll see that here. So snowshoe hare, this came in a little bit dark from what the photograph actually is. This is one of my award-winning photographs. This is what a snowshoe hare looks like out in the environment. Very difficult to find. White on white. They're masters of camouflage. They need to camouflage because they're someone's lunch or dinner. And they blend it with the snow, and you can see here that it may be kind of hard to see, but I think it's kind of hard to see. But he's actually sitting in a form. So he's sitting in a little snow cave. And he knows I'm there, he knows I'm photographing because his eyes, he's looking right at me. And his ears are directed straight towards me, which is, this is a very actually hard scenario to find a snowshoe heron. Looking straight at you with the ears directly towards you. So he's looking at me, he knows I'm there, he's listening to everything I'm doing, and he said, you get 12 frames before I leave, so hurry up. After I took that 12 frame, he hopped away.
How far away were you?
Well, this is a 600 millimeter equivalent, and cropped probably about 80%. So I'm probably the distance we are at now. And mind you, they're also about 3 to 5 pounds, so they're not very big. Where's the blank one? Okay, so this is how they hop. If you notice the feet, this is the back foot, that goes forward, and the front feet go backwards. So when they're hopping, they go through a series of how they hop. The back feet come forward, and the front feet come backwards. Does that make sense? And you can see here the foot, his body length compared to the foot. And that's why they're called snowshoe hare. They're wearing little snowshoes so they can actually do this quickly. If they had smaller feet based in their environment, so they're hopping sometimes on 4 or 5 feet of snow, the size of the feet allows them to run quickly. And because it allows them to run quickly, animals like fox, coyotes, they have a hard time chasing after the snowshoe hare. The animal that doesn't are the lynx, because the lynx are also designed as an animal, they also have very large feet. And those large feet basically grasp snow just like we do snowshoeing. If we walk around and just walk with our boots, we sink. If we walk in snowshoes, we can stay a little elevated and not sink as much. And here you can see those feet. So these are his back feet. We talked about how the feet come forward and the front go back. These are the feet. You can see the toes spreading right here, and how large those feet are compared to their body. They almost look like earmuffs, but they're actually his feet. So, snowshoe hare, like any hare or rabbit, they like greens and they like grasses, and they will eat anything that smells good. The snowshoe hare, because where they're at in the forest, and the fact that there's usually a lot of snow, they eat pine needles. That's their main diet, is pine needles and pine bark during the wintertime. They've also been eating aspen bark. They can do that, and they also will dig underneath to try to find anything that's still growing and still sticking up, because we do have wild grasses here growing up. But when that's all covered, they resort to eating a pretty bland diet of pine needles. Snowshoe hares molt. And we talked about molting, which is changing, the fur changing. The snowshoe hare will actually change colors, and they're one of 2 of the hares that do that. So basically, 60-day process from start to finish. That's plus or minus, that's not an exact number. But as they start to molt, you see these weird changes on their body, and they start to look kind of goofy when they first start. They'll spot up, they'll get more spots, they'll start looking like this, and eventually, they look like this. Again, I'm sorry, these are coming in dark. But you can see here, what won't change are their feet. Their underbelly as well, but what's visible to us are their feet. And again, you can see how big their feet are compared to their body size. This is a snowshoe hare, we call him Moose. And he was running up and down the boardwalk because he was interested in another hare that was there. And he would run up and down, he would go up here and jump over. Then he'd climb back up again, run back down, jump over. But here, the strength, you can see him standing up, the feet again. And he's standing up, we call this periscoping, because they're looking kind of like a periscope coming from a ship. And he's looking around, oops. And you can see here the feet are still white, but his underbelly is also white. But most of us never get to see that underbelly. And because he's white as well, you can see a little white that's underneath the brown. This is towards the end of the summer, so you can see that that coat is starting to come in for their winter. American pika. So in Rocky Mountain National Park, we have one of two pikas, and they're called American pika. The other pika is not found in the lower 48. It's only found in Alaska. It's found in Canada, but in the US, it's Alaska, and that's the collared pika, but we're going to be talking about the American pika. So they're found at high elevations and live on rocky mountainsides in talus fields, and they're the smallest member of the Lagomorph family. Now, they kind of look like hamsters, right? To you, they don't really look like they're rabbits or hares at all, but they're part of the family. They're part of that second one. And this is a younger pika, so the pika of the year. And this is how they live. They live in rocky outcropping. Pika are indicators of climate change, so they do not like temperatures that are above about 75 or 78. Their body can't handle it. But when the temperatures do get that warm, which they're starting to get warmer and warmer, like this past summer, if you went up top to Rock Cut, it was pretty warm. The rock outcroppings actually keep it much cooler. So the temperatures in there are about 20, 30 degrees cooler than the outside temperature. So they'll tend to be inside those rock outcroppings that it's a maze. Just like warrens, these are mazes of rocks that they can run through. And here in this photograph, projector is overheating. Okay, in this photograph, you can see the likeliness of rabbits and hares. You can look at the back foot, the one that's in his ear. See how it has the same shape as a rabbit. And what he's doing here is he's scratching his ear, he's putting his feet in his ears because rabbits and hares like to put their feet in their ears. And what they're doing when they do that is they're actually taking wax out of their ears. And that gives them nutrients as well. A little snack for them. We typically see pikas too here in Rocky Mountain National Park. They're going to be gathering, so they cache for the winter because they don't hibernate. And you'll see them up and down and up and down and up and down caching and getting flowers, greens that they're going to have to eat once they go underground for the winter. Here's another, how they jump. And one of their favorite foods to collect are little flowers here, and these flowers are actually poisonous to them. So the flowers themselves, they won't touch, but when they clip these flowers, they'll clip them at the root or clip them at the stem, and when they dry out for the winter time, they actually can eat them. But initially, so you won't see them eat the flowers during the summertime when they're collecting, it's just in the wintertime when they've dried out.
Is it just that type of flower?
Just this one, yeah, because this is prevalent up. If you go up towards Rock Cut, you'll see, this end of July-ish, August, this is when they start collecting these types of flowers. And when it snows, just because it snows doesn't mean pikas retreat into their rocky outcropping. Pikas will stay out until there's enough snow, whatever that number is, enough snow. I know I saw evidence of pika just 2 weeks ago, Before some areas got some deep amount of snow, now we believe that they finally have gone underground and said they're not gonna come up until, May or June. But just because it snows doesn't mean they don't like the snow. And they actually do, and they like to sit out when they sit out in the sun and enjoy running around in the snow. This pika here, this is sunset, and it was a little cool out that night. So you can see how the pika, the other ones kind of looked a little thinner, and this one's kind of a little puffed up. And this is how they will conserve energy and keep warm, is by doing a little puff up. And that's the same thing with all the other rabbits and hares as well. When it gets cold, they sit, they tuck inside to keep themselves warm. White-tailed jackrabbits. They're found in mountain parks with scattered conifer trees, sagebrush, and native shortgrass prairie, and they're the largest of the Colorado hares. Now, I just called it a jackrabbit, and I just said it was one of the largest Colorado hares. So how did we get the word jackrabbit out of this? I don't know, I read, and this is hearsay, I don't know if it's true or not, but somewhere I read that when the European settlers came here, they called these rabbits jackass rabbits. And the reason why they did that is because their ears reminded them of donkey ears, which they call asses. I don't know if I can say that, but they call them, so this is how, and the word stuck, and they've kept the word jackrabbit. But a jackrabbit is actually a hare. So white-tailed jackrabbits, again, they're masters of disguise. These guys don't necessarily turn all white. They molt the same way as the snowshoe hare do. They are darker in the summertime, and they have a white coat in the wintertime, but they don't fully change, is what I found out. So you can see here how well this one is camouflaged. And to the left of him is a form. So he actually goes underneath, he'll go underneath or around, and this form is basically just a sagebrush with snow on it. So underneath the sagebrush, you got all the roots, you got all the branches, and that's what we call a form. So when he's tired of being out there, in the little snow form, he's gonna go underneath the bush, and that's how he's gonna stay away from predators, and probably me, because he's sick of me photographing him. This is another white-tailed jackrabbit, and you can see he has a little whiter coat. And again, he's sitting in a little snow form. And the ears, you can see the ears they're large ears, but they're not really large ears. And you can see the eyes, you can see the redness in the eyes. They're actually orange in the eye. And that's typical for these types of hares. Here's another example of a form, a snow form. So this whitetail jumped through the snow at some point, ended up sitting out in the snow. They do need their vitamin D, so a lot of times on sunny days with the snow, they'll be sitting out in the snow. Now, according to literature in Rocky Mountain National Park, there are supposed to be some of these in the park. I did not find these in the park. These I found in another part of Colorado. I have never seen them, though, in Rocky. Rocky does have the environment that these are in, but I found these in a different part of Colorado. The next one is the desert cottontail. They're found in arid conditions, including prairie dog towns on the plains, foothills on the eastern plains, and lower elevations on the west slope. Now, Colorado has 3 different types of cottontails. This is the second type of cottontail. And they're actually, unless you put them close to sit together, they're very actually difficult to determine which one they are. And the reason why I know which ones they are is because of the location they've been taken at. So when you have desert cottontails, they typically, how you can tell is they typically have that red scruff on their neck. If you can see this one running, they're usually a little grayer, and they have red scruffs. So you can kind of see, this is a young one eating some little flowers that are coming up. And here you can also see the veins in his ears. So typically with the desert, you will actually see more of that because of the conditions that they're in. They're usually drier conditions, more arid conditions, hotter. And this is how they're adjusting to it. And because they're in hotter conditions, their ears won't have as much hair in there. So if you look closely on there, there's not that much hair in the ears, and you can see the veins. And also too, a lot of times the desert cottontails have a skinnier look to them instead of a more full look, and that's how you'll tell. And here, have you ever been to the airport and leave and wonder why you have a leak coming out of your car? That's probably from a desert cottontail. I have found over time that rabbits tend to like the smell of or taste of like a rubbery substance. It's the same substance that's on backpacks. It's on, for instance, the stroller and any wiring that you have in your car. That's typically what you'll see at the airport are these desert cottontails. And here, you can see the scruff, and you can see the veins in the ears, a little light on their ears, the veins going through. And again, the scruff. And these guys, we talked about them going into burrows. This is actually a prairie dog colony where they're at. And so he's going into the prairie dog hole. So a lot of times when you see prairie dogs, you will see desert cottontails as well, because they live in the same environment, and basically they live in the same housing development, so to speak.
Do they get along?
Oh yeah, they do. And a lot of times the prairie dogs will, if there's predators around, the prairie dogs typically will warn the rabbits. The rabbits will also warn the prairie dogs, so they kind of work in synergy together to avoid being eaten. Prairie dog towns are, favorite snack for many wild animals, so they tend to let each other know. They also, rabbits in general, here's a cottontail he's grooming. They're very big groomers. They like to stay clean. A lot of times you'll see them, licking their paws to clean their faces, cleaning their scruff. This is a desert cottontail basically cleaning his scruff. He's thinking nobody's looking, but I'm looking. Now we have a black-tailed jackrabbit. Again, it's a hare, and they're found in semi-desert country in southern, western, eastern Colorado, and on the disturbed prairie in the east. And this is the largest of the North American hare species. So typically you'll find this around the Four Corners area in Colorado, so where it's drier, more arid. We've also been found near the old Stapleton Airport, which is now Rocky Mountain Arsenal. They're out there. Not in large numbers, but they are out there. They're in larger numbers down further south. And as you can see in this photograph, it's not a black tail, but it's a very dark tail. And versus the white-tailed jackrabbit has just that, it's a white tail. This one is a black tail. Black-tailed jackrabbits, they're the largest. They also have the largest ears. And the reason why they have the largest ears is for that cooling that we talked about, that the larger the ear is, the more cooling it provides the hare or the rabbit. And because these typically live in really arid conditions and very hot temperatures, in order for them to keep cool and survive, this is how they survive with the cooling mechanisms. So you'll tend to find jackrabbits, the blacktails with really, really big ears. And this is an older one, so he's more mature. And obviously the older they are, the bigger they are and the larger their ears are. This is a black-tailed leveret. He's probably about 4 months old, and you can see how big his ears are compared to his body. It looks like he has big, huge spoons up there. You can also see his eyes, so you can see how the black-tailed jackrabbits also have the orange eyes to them. This is a little boy, and he was the cutest little thing. He was playing with his shadow down on the ground. These guys too, just like all the snowshoe hare is a master of disguise with the snow and the winter, these guys are with their coat in the summertime. So this is another black-tailed jackrabbit, and you can see how big his ears are compared to his body, and how well they blend in with the camouflage. I almost didn't notice this one when I walked by, but this, and he's underneath the brush, so I'm laying down here, and he's tucked in, all nice and cool. And here you can see their legs. This one's getting up after a little nap, and how long and powerful those legs are. And like I said, the hares can run up to about 35 miles an hour and cover a distance, a very long distance in a very short period of time. So eastern cottontails. So these are found below 6,500 feet. They're found north of the Palmer Divide, north to Fort Collins, and their broadest distribution is the Platte and Republican River Basin and the southeast part of the state. They're also mainly found in riparian areas, which riparian areas, if we know anything about moose and willows, that's where moose hang out. But typically here in this area, we don't find many of these. In area, typically we find these in the Jefferson County area, down the valley here. And how we can tell that this is a eastern cottontail is if you notice the ears, they're kind of like the mountain cottontail, so they're a little rounder. So they're not long and pointy, they're kind of round and scoop-like, like spoon-like. And I only have one photos of them because I've only been able to find one out of all my times trying to photograph rabbits and hares. So typical lifespan, we have, with cottontails, they can live up to 2 years in the wild. Black-tailed jackrabbits and white-tailed jackrabbits can live up to 8 years in the wild. Snowshoe hares are up to 5 years in the wild, and pikas are up to 7 years in the wild. And this assumes there's no predation, there's no disease. This assumes that nothing would happen. This is how long they can potentially live. Now, causes of death, we know predation is number one. Unfortunately, rabbits and hares, both of them, are a food source for pretty much any animal here that eats meat. So any birds, hawks, I mean, you name it, they will, if they eat meat, they like rabbits as lunch and dinner and a little snack in between. Their reproduction rate basically keeps up with the amount of predation. And because they breed quickly, it provides food for anything that eats meat, and it also keeps the species going. Vehicle collision. We've all seen animals, we've all seen roadkill, a lot of rabbits on the road. That's another reason for it. Hunting. Colorado Parks and Wildlife do allow hunting for some of the cottontails that they do. And the big one here is disease. Rabbit hemorrhagic disease 2. This was a disease that is actually, it's a man-made virus that it came from China and it was released in Australia. And the United States actually just got this virus in the it was about 2018. It started in Washington State, but they were able to contain it. In March of 2020, and if you guys remember what March of 2020 was COVID, we found it in New Mexico. And we found it in New Mexico, and it wiped out colonies upon colonies upon colonies of black-tailed jackrabbits just instantly. And it's unsure whether or not the disease came from Mexico, like other diseases have, or if it actually started in New Mexico and spread. Colorado was one of the first states to get what we call RHTV2. I know CPW literature, they want to know if anybody finds dead pikas or dead snowshoe hare, that's of most concern. If you find 3 dead bodies or more, and typically how we know that it's the hemorrhagic disease is if there's blood coming from its nose or its mouth. That's typically the sign that it's a hemorrhagic disease because basically it's bunny Ebola. It has been spread to every state in the country at this point. And it wasn't able to be contained, and we don't know because there was no, it actually was discovered at a rabbit farm, and they had no cleaning supplies because we were in short supply of bleach back then and all cleaning supplies coming in, and they couldn't contain it. And unfortunately, like disease spreads, it spreads. So that's the big one we're concerned about with all rabbits and hares in Colorado. If they do die, like the other day, I came across a dead hare, and we had to make sure that there was no blood coming from its nose or its mouth before we can proceed. And luckily, that was due to predation. Tularemia is another one. We call this rabbit fever. The rabbits will get lethargic, just white discharge from the eye. We don't have tularemia often, but we did have a case of tularemia a couple of years ago. That was at Sprague Lake. That affected some muskrats that I know. I don't know if it affected any rabbits, but we did have that. Oxomatosis. If anybody has ever read Watershed Down, this is the disease that they died from. It is also man-made, and again, heavy and lack of breathing. This will kill instantly. If an animal comes in, if a rabbit comes in contact with it, it's usually swollen genitalia, eyes, mouth, and that's how you can tell a rabbit has that. And another cause of death is just habitat loss. The more we build on territory. If they can't go somewhere, or if their predators are forced to go into the area, that pushes predation increases and their habitat decreases. So, questions?
I have one question online. She wanted to know if you had ever gotten a photograph of a jackalope.
There is no such thing as a jackalope. That's an old wives' tale. There's really no thing as that. I think that was some probably European settler who had nothing better to do and tried to. No, there are no jackalopes.
In central Boulder, there's a ton of rabbits that we thought were eastern cottontails, but it sounds like you're maybe thinking they're desert cottontails.
Well, they are up here. It's just they're not as prevalent as the desert cottontail or the mountain cottontail.
We'll see 60 in a mile in town.
Okay, I would have to take a look at it. If you look at it and the one I had, because I don't have many photographs of the eastern cottontails, because living around here we don't have a whole lot of them. The main area is basically the southeast of the state, but there are some up here. So like I said, they're in Jefferson County, and it could be, but you just have to take a look at them. And if you look at them and their ears are round, they're rounder, they're not straight and pointing, like this. If you can see here, they're kind of, the head is bigger than the ears on here. If you can look at those rabbits, and they have kind of, when they look at you, their faces are a little pointier, and their ears are a little rounder. So, let me go back here. Versus the desert cottontail, which is the other one it could be. You see how long their ears are compared to their head? So you just have to look, and they're really hard to tell because they have the same coloring. The eastern cottontails are also the bigger ones of the three. So if they don't seem to you really, really small, but they seem a little bigger, and their ears are a little rounder, then it could be an eastern. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that they feel the cecal material coming out.
They do.
Kind of gross. What's the difference between cecal and fecal material then?
Well, Cooper, you want to come up and explain? The regular fecal material is, we call it a pellet. It's just a little round, it's round, and it's like a Cocoa Puff. Little brown. The jackrabbits, obviously, because they're bigger, they're going to be bigger than, let's say, a regular cottontail. Those are more like larger peppercorn sizes, but they're just round brown. do they have one I can show? So those just come out like a pellet machine, so to speak. The seagulls, they're great, they're in clusters. So the size of a single piece of seagull is actually very small. So it's the size maybe of your, take a nail, maybe half the sizes of your nails, but they're in clusters. So the clusters have, Susan, are you out there? How many in a cluster do you think, about 20?
Yeah, and they smell a lot.
Yeah, and so they're very, when you touch them, they're very sticky. They have a sticky quality, and if you mush them by accident, they smell, versus the pellets don't.
So
They have
they're much softer?
They're softer and stickier. They have like it's hard to describe. It's like they'll stick to your fingers if you touch them.
And they're darker too, aren't they?
Yeah.
They can be, yeah. Yeah. Does he have one to show? Go ahead.
You said the hares are in forms, so when they have babies, I mean, where, are they like in the snow there, or are they under something? I mean, I'm trying to imagine how they're kind of out in the open almost, and how they would protect a little,
So when they have babies, they're not gonna have them out in the open.
okay, they're gonna be under a bush or something like?
So if you can see in this photograph, the bottom is snow, so it's cut off a little bit. This is a sagebrush, bitterbrush sagebrush. So it's just snow on top. So underneath, it's like a cave, it's a root system, but it doesn't go underground. So they'll have babies like that. And then until the babies are ready to come out, which is a couple weeks, then they'll emerge from there. And of course, with the feeding as well, with both rabbits and hares, usually once a day, they'll come and they'll feed, and then they won't come back because again, they don't want to attract any predators to their den area. So they'll stay away as long as they can, and then of course they have to come feed their kits or their leverets.
Are the babies born in the spring or all throughout the year, or what's the rhythm?
Well, like I said, the mating is like end of February through July, August time. So they can have 3 or 4 litters. And then that's also not an exact science. So typically, you see, you're gonna have the first litter. So let's say we have mating at the end of February or March. So we're gonna have them being born in April. And then like the snowshoe hare can get pregnant again. So while they're carrying, so some of these can actually carry ones that are going to be born. It's kind of a weird process, but they can pretty much get pregnant again fairly quickly. So they breed more in the summer months than they do in the winter months. So that's when you'll tend to see. So like litters, if you ever see leverets of snowshoe hares in the park, some of them are born in April, May, some of them are born in July, some are August.
Okay,
But typically they don't carry on through past September.
yeah,
Because if that's when the winter starts, and like them all, like with the pika, they usually have 2 litters. One is, they get sick of being cramped up in their little rock outcroppings, and in May they'll start to, eat their mates, and that's when they'll mate, is in May. And if they have a second litter and that's too late, a lot of times those litters won't survive because they don't have time to grow, to be weaned, to grow up, and to collect. So, but typically it's the spring, summer months that they're going to be doing the mating.
So do the males do anything other than just, I mean, they just kind of get it on with them and then they leave and everything is left to the females then, or what?
Pretty much.
Pretty much?
In terms of the jackrabbits, the males become sexually mature a little bit before the females. The females, it can take up to 2 years for them to start breeding. But yeah, the males pretty much, they come around. We have a...
Thank you, man. Thank you, man.
Pretty much. In this picture here, so they have a little courtship, so to speak. So they don't just do wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. They have a little courtship that goes on. So the rabbits and snowshoe hare because they're so small to the ground and they have such short legs, what they'll do is they'll engage and they'll be jumping over each other. So they'll play this little game and they'll jump each other or whatever type deal. And one of them is going to urinate on the other one at some point. So that's kind of their marking, but that's what they'll do, and that's their little foreplay, so to speak. And this can go on for a couple days. Now, both rabbits and hares, they're not monogamous, so they will go around and, you know, have a good time, and breed like rabbits. The hares, on the other hand, if you've ever heard the term mad as a March hare, the Alice in Wonderland, there's a reason for that. The hares, on the other hand, they'll engage in boxing. Now, this is kind of the start of some boxing here. They'll do a little slapping, and they'll do a little, you know, they'll get up, and if you've seen photographs, they'll get on their hind legs, and they'll start kind of scratching against each other and stuff like that. And that's the hare foreplay. And it was thought at one point that the males were the ones fighting over the female, and the female was just kind of watching. And that's actually not true. It's actually a male and female fighting. And when the female says no, and they do say no, because if they're not an eatress, they're not interested, they'll give a little slap to the male to say, you need to leave, and you need to leave now. And, you know, the male runs off and, you know, goes and finds another candidate that's an estrus.
Question online, are the kits or leverets who are born earlier in the season, are they white or are they brown?
Which, for the snowshoe hare?
Yeah.
They're always brown. They're always born brown. So even if a snowshoe hare has a baby, or has babies, when there's snow on the ground, the snowshoe hare leverets will be brown. And the same with the jackrabbits.
Do they tend to have litters or just one at a time?
They'll have litters, 3 to 4 each. Now the survival rate, both on the rabbits and the hares, beyond the first year, it's almost precarious time. It's like other animals, you know, you need to survive the first year. Fortunately, rabbits and hares, we don't have a very high percentage of the rabbits and hares surviving past the first year. And again, and that's due to, you know, a lot of things we talked about is predation, getting hit by cars or disease. And if they do survive past, then we can see those living up to 5 years. I've seen one, and I know she died of old age, one hare, and she had to have died of old age, just from the time I was able to find her and photograph her, that they were. And this one here, and this one's a fairly older one as well.
What's our life expectancy?
For which? Well, for the black-tailed jackrabbits, up to 8 years. So the cottontails are less. Snowshoe hares are about 5. Pikas are about 7. I had a slide on that. And cottontails have the least lifespan in the wild, which is up to 2.
Question online wanted to know if you have any experience with swamp rabbits.
No, that is on my bucket list to do. Swamp rabbits. Those typically are found in Missouri, so the Ozarks in that area. And those are the ones who swim. And rabbits can swim. So they can run really quickly, and rabbits actually can swim. And so what we're talking about is this rabbit is they hop like deer. So they're part of the cottontail family, and they hop like deer. So they kind of boing, boing, boing instead of kind of scuttle and jump. And they swim because the area that they're in are little swampy areas, and for them to get from point A to point B and get away from a predator is actually to get into the water.
That's the one that attacked Jimmy Carter, right?
Before you go today, tell us about the babies you brought.
Okay, so, these are our two rabbits, Jackson and Cooper. They're continental giants, so they're the largest rabbit breed in the world. The breed typically is about 18 to 24 pounds. And these guys are actually small, they're smallest in the litter, and Jackson's about 15 pounds. So he's a little famine resistant, as we call him, and Cooper's a little smaller. He's about 12 and a half pounds because he's actually handicapped. So he's in a wheelchair. And these are domesticated rabbits, so they're not wild rabbits, they're descendants of the European rabbits, which are the domestic rabbits.
And that's Jackson.
This is Jackson.
That's
Stay
Jackson.
away from the wires.
They love wires. We don't know why. Anytime people have owned rabbits, every time we've had them, we've had to cover up our wires with conduits because for some reason they go straight to the wire. You can put food on the ground, you can do whatever, and they will go straight for the wire and eat that and cook that wire.
So are these descendant of ones that were bred for fur and food?
Yeah, so the continental giant, actually, their history is from Germany. These rabbits were bred for meat at some point. They grow fairly quickly. When these guys were born, they were actually probably, 3 inches long. The litters there can come up to about 18 of them. We've heard about 18, and they grow fairly quickly, so they were bred initially as a food source. I know in North Korea they've had them to eat, but they no longer are being bred for food sources, they're for pets. So any other questions?
So I have a question on that hemorrhagic disease.
Mm-hmm.
Are we at all concerned that that might pass over into humans?
No. It's a virus that was specifically designed to kill rabbits. And again, it was started out in Australia to be used in Australia. And because the farmers, because they have a population issue with rabbits over there, and for some reason they thought, let's just let a virus go. And the problem is it takes a flight to get here. And that's transmittable on your shoes, that's transmittable on your cars, that can be transmitted from a fox that eats a rabbit, that goes and kills a hawk, and then a hawk comes down, or an eagle comes down and eats something, and it's spread very quickly. And we think in Colorado, it was first discovered in Monte Vista, is where that came from. And I was one of 2 veterinarians in town that was constantly bugging the chief veterinarian in the state of Colorado to get a vaccine approved, because I told them that Monte Vista, if we know anything about, if there's another photographer here, Monte Vista is where there's sandhill crane migration. And I deduced the fact that because rabbit hemorrhagic started up in Washington State, that it was a migratory path of the birds that were causing the disease. So we were able to get a vaccine fairly quickly into Colorado, and that needed to be imported, but people can't get it. The animals that eat an infected animal can't get it. Like I said, CPW, I know, had literature out that snowshoe hare and pikas were of concern if anybody ever found dead ones, to let them know. And then they changed it to if you find 3 of them or more, then they want to know, because it is concern. It's concern here and all across the world, actually.
So when you go to Australia, when you come back, are your shoes decontaminated or whatever?
Well, so for instance, I photographed rabbits and hares all over the world. And when I go, for instance, to Scotland and do the mountain hares out in Scotland, I either wear booties, so we slip some like surgical booties, so heavy duty surgical booties that we can throw away when we're done. After we climb up and go to mountainous areas that we know hair out, or we throw those away. Or if we're actually using our winter boots, when we come home, we put them in a sanitizing bag. So it heats it up and it kills any virus that may have been transmitted. So anything that has come in contact with the snow, the area, the environment of any hair, we sanitize before we go out and do anything again. And
That's whether you find a dead one or not.
right, because I personally don't want to transmit between countries. I know it's in England, I know it's in Scotland, other countries, so I want to be a responsible photographer, and I don't want anything to happen. So for instance, in Scotland, with the mountain hares, which are cousins to the white-tailed jackrabbit, so they basically look the same. They had a serious drop in the numbers of those mountain hares, and that has happened since March of 2020, so basically when COVID was around. And they attribute it to habitat loss. They attribute it to coursers, hare coursers, which they do that over there. They set dogs on them. And also the RHDV2 that came from England. So it's very quick. It will kill a colony. And the problem with animals, for instance, like pika, they live in separate areas, but if one pika gets it and happens to run to another one's area that happens to run, all they got to do is brush up against the rock. All they got to do is leave some fecal matter, and the other one brushes up against it, and they will bring it to a colony, and then we'll bring it to another. And luckily we haven't had, as far as I know, we haven't had huge numbers in the entire state. Pretty much every county I know has had a case of RHDV2. So, I do ask if you go into a park, be cognizant if you walk into an area that you know that there's pika, that's, that there are some snowshoe hares, and, like I know I'm very careful, I'm very aware of where my shoes have been, or where my bags have been as well. And if you see a dead rabbit, I know a lot of people, like the other day I was driving and there's a dead rabbit and a car just drove right over it. And by doing that a second time, yes, the rabbit's dead, but that's a way you're going to transmit disease if there's any disease out there. So hopefully there won't be any deaths that we find out, that if RHDV2 does make it to the park, which it has not, it will mean some declines in some hare numbers, rabbits and hares as well. So.
Well, thank you, Deena. This was fascinating.
If you have any other questions, here's my info. Feel free to text me if you have any other questions that you think of later, but I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for coming. That was really interesting, and thank you for sharing and bringing your family. And this is our next talk about boreal toads who are threatened, and there's an effort to bring them back to life and increase their numbers. So stay tuned, February 13th. Hope to see you then, and thanks for coming, folks, and Happy New Year.